Ghana? Well, I had my education from Peter's Educational Center in Kumasi, both my basic education and my secondary education from the same institution. Then I came to Legon to read Bachelor of Arts degree in economics. Then after my national service at the economics department, went on to pursue my Master of Philosophy degree in economics, and then went on to pursue my PhD in economics. I completed a PhD in 2018, and I'm back to lecture at the department as a lecturer in economics. Well, my research areas are, development economics, health economics, public sector economics, and then international economics. And I want to publish extensively in these areas. But of course, I'm also open to media engagements. I don't know, those of you who follow me, I have a number of media engagements to discuss the budget and other topical economic issues like the one we are dealing today. For my hobby, I think I like to play football, and I also like to watch it. And I play musical instruments as well as a hobby. And I also write plays, drama. I'm a script writer. So maybe in one day you invite me to write script and then direct it in your church or whatever. I'm a Baptist, so I'm a proud Baptist. So
great, thank you for that intro. My first question would be, what is inflation? And can you explain with a very practical story-like example?
Let's see the speed of a car. So when you are driving 100 kilometers per hour, that's your speed. If you are driving 80 kilometers per hour, that's your speed. So inflation is the speed of price increases. Is the speed of price increases. So if you say currently inflation is 7.5%. So we are saying that the speed with which prices increase is 7.5%. And so if inflation increases to 10%, that means it's more like you are driving a car and you have pressed on the accelerator and you are speeding, you're increasing your speed from maybe 80 kilometers per hour to 100 kilometers per hour. So when we say inflation is declining, it doesn't mean prices are falling. It means that the speed with which prices are increasing are falling. So it's more like you are driving and you reduce the speed of your car. So that is the inflation for you. And inflation is a general price level. It's the average price for Ghana. So if somebody is in the US and a person wants to know how prices increase in Ghana, the person will refer to inflation. So inflation does not refer to one single item. It refers to the general price of goods that the consumer buys, the consumer purchases as it were. And then the second scenario is that let's see inflation as a thief that will steal your money, because inflation reduces the purchasing power. So if inflation is 10%, it means the thief is stealing 10% of your money. If inflation is 7%, it means the thief is stealing 7% of your money, because the purchasing power is how much goods that your money can buy. So if inflation is 10%, inflation is taking away 10% of the purchasing power. So in a simple sense, inflation is stealing 10% of your money. That is why we always want a smaller inflation rate, so that we will admit that the thief is stealing only a small portion of our money. The third scenario to look at it is that if inflation is 7%, then on the average, if you bought something 100 cedis last year, it means you need 7.5 cedis more to buy the same item. So if you bought, say, a shirt for 100 cedis or a shoe for 100 cedis last year, and this year the inflation is 7.5%, it means you need 7 cedis, 50 pesos to buy the same thing that you bought last year. If you want to buy the same thing this year, you need 7 cedis, 50 pesos more. So I think we're given these three scenarios, we should understand inflation better.
All right, thank you. When I was putting my questions together for you, I came across this term called money terrorism. I think I pronounced it correctly. Can you explain what that is?
Money what?
Money terrorism. money terrorism, I
Money
believe.
tourism.
Yes.
Wow, I actually have not heard of this before. Uh,
Oh, really?
yes, I don't know what they mean by money. Maybe they use a different term to describe it.
Monetarism.
No, I have not heard this. Like I'm saying,
Okay,
maybe
sure.
they are
Let me
using a
try.
different term to describe it. Yes, yes.
All right. What are some causes, general causes of inflation?
Well, inflation is caused by two main, factors, as it were. The first factor is what we call the demand pool inflation. Demand pool inflation is when you have more demand for limited supply of goods. As some people simply term it, that more money chasing fewer goods. People usually say that more money chasing fewer goods. So that's the aggregate demand higher than aggregate supply. In other words, if the things that people want to buy on the market are more than what we have produced on the market, we have produced and selling on the market, then inflation will happen. Because let's take a simple scenario. Assuming where you are is a market that sells, say, tomatoes. If maybe you plan to sell tomatoes for 100 customers, and you wake up, you go to the market now, instead of 100 customers that you expect, you are getting like 200, 500 customers and coming for the same tomatoes. You have not added production. So it is just, prudent to take advantage of the situation and increase the prices. So when you have more people demanding what has been produced, then it will cause inflation. This is what the kind of inflation that we experienced during the lockdown, during the COVID lockdown. What we call the panic buying. Many people went to the markets to buy vegetables, to buy minerals, to buy bread and all that. And we saw that the prices of these items shot up. So that is the aggregate demand inflation. There's a demand pool inflation. The second contributor of inflation is the cost push inflation. Now, the cost push inflation is caused by cost of production, the cost factors. So things like transportation, things like utility bills, the interest you pay on your loans, all these things are, so anything that you want to produce, the cost involved in producing that item, if the cost involved is higher, obviously you charge higher price for the item. So the cost of production. That is why when fuel prices are increased, it affects transportation, and you realize that everybody begins to increase their prices on the market. In fact, that has been Ghana's major problem, over the years. It is a cost push inflation, not actually the demand pool. We experienced the demand pool recently during the lockdown, but before the lockdown, it has always been the cost push inflation that happens. But you can also say that inflation is divided into two. We have the food inflation and the non-food inflation. So the food inflation is usually about, how prices of food, those in the agriculture sector, they increase. The non-food refers to fuel, electricity bill, water bill, interest rate and all that. So these are the two major causes of inflation. The demand pool, where aggregate demand is higher than aggregate supply, and then the cost push, which is coming from the cost of production.
Thank you. Demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. My next question, can you tell me about, you just stated the causes of inflation, and we've had some countries in Africa experience hyperinflation like Zimbabwe. I saw a fact that in 2008, a loaf of bread in Zimbabwe cost about 1.6 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. So which kind of inflation affected their country, and how did everything happen? If you can just talk about that a little.
Well, there are also different types of inflation depending on the rates, the inflation rates. I think many developed countries experience what we call the creeping inflation, where the creeping inflation is where you have inflation around 3%, 3% or less. Then the walking inflation, which is between 3 and 10%, more or less the single digit inflation that Ghana we always experience. And then we have the medium ones up to, we have the galloping, we have the jumping, the galloping. The jumping is in the tens, the galloping is in the hundreds, and then the hyperinflation is in the thousands. So it's all about how fast the prices increase. That is how maybe the hyperinflation can, because but usually for a country to experience any type of this inflation, it's a combination of the demand factors and the cost factors, the supply factors. So I've mentioned to you earlier that two main causes of inflation, so the demand pull and the cost push. So if you are in a country where both factors are happening at the same time, your demand is higher than your supply, causing demand pull inflation, and then also the factors of production are increasing, the price of the factors of production are increasing so much, then you experience cost push. So when you put these two together, you're very likely to experience hyperinflation. And the hyperinflation is not good at all. I mean, when I was in Kenya, one of my roommates was from Zimbabwe. So as part of my master's degree, I had to go to Kenya. And my roommates, it was people from Sub-Saharan Africa that we were organized there. So I asked him about the hyperinflation that happened, and then he told me that it was that bad to the extent that if you went to a supermarket to ask for the price of something, and then the person says, okay, it's 1,000 cedis, then you say, okay, let me go to my car at the car park and come back and pay. By the time you come back, the price has increased. So that's how bad the situation was. You carry money full of, a bag full of money, and then all you are going to buy is maybe bread. All you can buy is bread. So I wonder how they were able to buy cars and other major expenditure. So hyperinflation is in the worst form of all types of inflation. And Germany has experienced it in the 40s, Hungary experienced it in their 30s, and a few other countries. But Ghana, our highest has been 123. So 123 we have. So that was in the jumping inflation. When you're in the hundreds, you're talking about jumping. Then no, hundreds is galloping. So we've experienced the highest of 123, but that was in the 1980s, 83, 84, where we went for the structural adjustment program. Things were very bad in the country. So, but since then, you've been always been between 30%, 40%, and then 1%. But recently, in recent times, we have been doing well. I think in the past 10 years, our highest has been around 16%, and our lowest has been today 7.5%. So I see that the last 3 years has been okay for us. We've experienced single-digit inflation, for the past 3 years. But for COVID, we would have maintained it. But we know that we can still, even with the COVID, it just increased to 11%, then came back to 9%. So it's been okay for Ghana so far.
Right. Thank you. Now, is inflation good or bad for the economy?
Well, I would say both good and bad, because nobody wants negative inflation or zero inflation. Zero inflation is not good for the economy. Negative inflation is not good for the economy. And then too much inflation too is not good for the economy. So I would say that a moderate type of inflation is fine. Between 1 and 5% is always fine for the economy, for every economy, between 1 and 5%. That one, you can boldly say your economy is doing well. If you are doing around, even single digits, if it's 9%, 8%, 7%, it's still fine. But for you to boldly say that your economy is strong, if you're doing like 5% or less, it's fine. Let me explain why I said too much inflation is not good. Too much inflation is not good because I know we will delve into details when we are talking about the investment bit. I mean, we know inflation eats away the purchasing power. So like the Zimbabwe example I gave you, you carry a bag full of money, you can only buy bread. You go to ask for the price, by the time you return, the price has increased. So nobody wants that. It will cripple your economy. Investors will run away. It will not be attractive. Okay, so why I also say that zero inflation or negative inflation is not good for us is that businesses must make profit. So if I'm a producer and I'm selling, I've gone to buy factors of production, I'm going to buy raw materials to produce, say, pure water or bread. And by the time I want to sell my produce on the market, prices have rather fallen. I'm going to make losses. So it will not be good for the producers. Producers will not benefit. So a moderate, single digit inflation is fine. If you're doing 5 or less, it is really, really good.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, how does inflation affect your cost of living, your savings, fixed income investments, and if you're saving for retirement? So you can just start with cost of living, then you go on from there.
Inflation increases cost of living because you bought a pure water for 1 cedi. Tomorrow you're going to buy pure water, they say it's 2 cedis. Meanwhile, your income is fixed at, say, 100 cedis. So obviously, it's going to increase cost of living. Your rent will go up, food expenditure will go up, any other kind of expenditure that you can think of, transportation, they'll all go up. So it will affect cost of living in that sense. Inflation will also reduce your real wage. And in the same sense, we are talking about purchasing power. Your real wage is equal to nominal wage over the inflation, or over the inflation. So if your inflation is going up, I mean, it is a ratio, it's A over B. So if the denominator is shooting up, the whole ratio will fall. So yes, it reduces the real wage, and then you are not likely to pay your bills and buy whatever you want to buy. In terms of investment, again, inflation eats away the value of money. So if you deposit your money in the bank, for example, and inflation is higher than the interest that you're receiving on your money, you will lose in the end. And that is why during high levels of inflation, people prefer to buy fixed, kind of investment, like buy a land or buy a house or buy a bond and all that. But if you are doing simple things like treasury bills, money deposits, time deposits, and the rate that you receive is less than inflation, you're always going to lose. So inflation will eat away the returns on your investment unless it is on fixed items like land, house, and all that. But even with that, and unless you have the money in bulk to buy the house and keep it, if you want to build the house one by one, year by year, or month by month, so you need the cement, the blocks, the iron rods, and these prices will always be going up. So the safest way is that you have the money, go and buy the house and keep it. You have the money, go and buy the land and keep it. With inflation, when you sell the land or the house, you rather will gain. So if you have a fixed asset like that, you rather gain during inflation, because by the time you decide to sell it, if you bought it at, say, 30,000 cedis, by the time you decide to sell it in 2 years or 5 years, you'll be selling at 100,000 because of inflation, and you will benefit. But if you put your money in any asset that you expect interest, so long as inflation is higher than the interest you gain from your investment, you always lose. You always lose. So that's how inflation affects our investment.
Cost of living, investments, and savings, yes.
Yes. Savings, again, the interest that we receive on our savings is minimal. Sometimes you'll be there now, you get some text message from the bank. How much have they given you? Just 50 pesos interest, or 2 cedis interest. And if inflation is 7%, you will need 7 cedis more, and the 50 pesos will not do anything. So inflation period, if inflation is high, it does not motivate people to invest, because it will eat away. But remember that in the general equilibrium sense, we assume that savings is equal to investment. So whenever whatever we attribute to investment, we can say the same thing about savings because we save to invest. And so when we are saying that, say, inflation eats away the value of investments, in the same sense that inflation will eat away the value of your savings. It will discourage people to save. It is not it is not a good thing to recognize at all or to experience at all. So many people wouldn't want to save. They rather want to spend now, consume now, or they rather want to buy, fixed assets that can last longer, like land and houses. These are the safest investments that you can make during times of high inflation. Other than that, no matter the amount of invest savings you make, the value of your money will go away because the banks may give you interest rate which is lower than the inflation rate.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Now, you've already mentioned two fixed assets from houses to land that perform well in an inflationary environment. Would you like to touch that again? Because that was my next question, but you already answered it in advance. So, how
Yeah.
about how does inflation affect commodities?
Which kind of commodities are you referring to?
Um, Oil, gold, those kind of commodities, if someone is investing in those commodities?
Yeah. Again, it depends on the differences in the price. So you look at the inflation rates and you look at the returns that you get. Okay. So if you go to say, during the COVID time, because of high prices, because of high oil prices, and because of other items, people decided, the stock market crashed. So therefore, people went and removed their money and then bought gold. So those commodities is kind of, it could benefit you or not, depending on the returns that you get, but it's more safer than currency. The gold, in times of higher inflation, the gold and other commodities that you refer to are more safer. They'll give you more returns than currency and other deposits that you can, because you would then expect higher returns. So again, when you are talking about investment and inflation, the key word here is the returns. You want to compare the returns to the inflation rate. If the returns that you get is lower than the inflation rate, then it doesn't matter the commodity, you're going to lose. So, but we know from literature that gold and other assets give us more returns than the simple treasury bill or simple savings. So once you compare the returns and the inflation, then you make your decision. And that is why I was able to confidently talk about land and houses, because a land that I bought at 35,000 cedis 5 years ago, today is selling at 120,000 Ghana cedis. So no matter the level of inflation now, I will not lose. I'll always benefit. If I want to sell my land now, instead of, I bought it at 35,000, now I'll get over 100,000 from it. So it's the safest way to make an investment if you have money. That is why the real estate people, they get money as long as there's demand for the houses, because the value of the houses keep rising, and it rises above the inflation. So no matter the level of inflation, you, the person who invested in the real estate, you are likely to benefit than the person who bought treasury bills or who invested in other things. So always compare the inflation rate and then the returns on your investment and make the informed decision.
Okay, thank you. Is inflation going to grow at a stable rate in Ghana, and what can we expect in the future?
Okay, so you want us to narrow the discussion to Ghana's inflation rate,
You
right?
can start from Ghana and then go globally.
Well, the global inflation has been moderate, it's been fine. Ghana's inflation rate, well, it used to be around 9%, 10%, which is one of the highest in the sub-region. Because we are comparing ourselves with Ivory Coast, Nigeria, and Kenya. If you check the map, the chart, you'll see that those countries are doing better than us in terms of inflation. But currently, as we speak, Ghana is one of the best performing countries when it comes to inflation because of the 7% rate that we are enjoying now. So when we are talking about inflation in Ghana, let's look at two main components and I understand it. The two main determinants of our inflation in Ghana. Like I said earlier on, it's very rare to see the demand pull inflation in Ghana because apart from the COVID period, I have not seen in any period where there were more demand for the world demand over the production. It means that we have been doing well to produce. So let's come to the cost push inflation. Two main things, the food inflation and the non-food inflation. Let's tackle the food inflation first. What goes into food? You can talk about beverages, you can talk about cereals, you can talk about tubers, and all that, vegetables, fruits. So when you have a very good agri policy that is increasing production, we have seen the reward from the Planting for Food and Jobs, government's policy on planting for food and jobs, which is giving us some benefits, some results. So I feel that with that policy, even if the next, if this party loses, the next party that comes to power should intensify or deepen or spend more, invest more in this program and make sure that there's abundance of food. Whenever there's abundance of food, when there's enough food to eat, we will not worry so much about the food inflation. So we should talk about irrigation so that we can have an all-year production. We should talk about storage facilities where during the bumper harvest, we can save or we can store some of the food to be used during the lean season. And then we also make sure that we give the right price for the farmers and also try and subsidize their farm implements, because when they are going to buy fertilizer and the fertilizer is subsidized by government, they are very likely to reduce the prices of their cassava and their plantain and all that. So let's have a very good agriculture policy for food production. Let's ensure food security. Let's ensure irrigation for an all-year production. Let's ensure that we store some of the food during bumper harvest, and then we also must add value. That's why there's every reason, I think the government is doing it, there's every reason to link the planting for food and jobs to the one district, one factory. The food production must serve as resources, as inputs for the factories. So for example, you go to Akomadan, they produce tomatoes. During bumper harvest, tomato is that cheap. But if you have a tomato factory that can, transform the raw tomatoes into tomato paste, then we shouldn't worry so much about whether we're in the bumper harvest or we're in the lean season, because there's some value addition going on at the factory. So let's ensure that there's some value addition at all levels, When we are talking about cassava, we should be thinking of gari. We should be thinking of raw materials for the brewery industries that produce beer. When we are talking about any crop that you take, there should be some value addition that we can add. You talk about a kumfi fruit juice, pineapple is there, orange, mango. We have to be thinking of how to store this food and add value to them. So that's the food inflation. So I think the government has started well. If they continue and deepen or invest more in the agri sector, we expect the food inflation to be tamed at a lower level for a long time. So that's the food inflation. The other component of inflation that we have in Ghana is the non-food inflation, which is coming from utility prices, fuel prices. So you go to the fuel pump and they say the price of petrol has been increased to say 6 cedis. Today we are talking about some 6 cedis per liter. If it keeps increasing, it is going to affect the cost of production, because the throttle driver who is going to buy the fuel will increase the throttle fare. The taxi driver will increase their fare. The market woman who would also board the taxi and go to the market will increase the price of the tomatoes. You and I who will go to Abubulushi market or Medina market, now Abubulushi market is no more. So you go to Medina market to buy tomatoes, the woman will tell you that when I took the taxi this morning, the fare was increased, so I'm also increasing the price of tomatoes. And that will cause inflation. The other one is utility bills, the electricity and water. I don't think that Ghana has much problem when it comes to the bills, the electricity and water. I think the major problem that is coming from the non-food inflation has been the fuel prices and rent. I don't know what is it about rent. Rent seems to be a dominant factor when you're talking about inflation in Ghana. There's a lot going on, and then nowadays it's even worse. People are charging their rent in dollars. You go to East Legon, even around Medina, people are quoting $1,000 and so on and so forth. And so, for rent is a major issue. Another inflation, non-food inflation that we can talk about is the clothing like shoes, shirts, and all that we wear. It seems to be okay, but if we can still do something about it as a country, it all comes to production. Because if you are able to produce our own shoe, our own shirts, at a higher level or on a large scale, then you should expect the prices to fall. But if you want to keep importing from Togo and from China, then it's likely to have a higher impact on our inflation. Let me mention this before I forget. There's something we call imported inflation.
Imported inflation.
Imported inflation. Ghana largely depends on imports. In fact, last time we imported, over 13 billion, Ghana cedis, imports. So it's a lot of money, 13 billion, like over $3 billion of imports. So it's a high level. No, $13 billion rather, dollars. $13 billion, not cedis, dollars. And then 3.2 billion from only China. Only China. So long as you want to continue to import, if you want to import from, say, China, China has its own inflation. So if China's inflation goes up and you're going there to import material, then definitely you're going to bring their inflation, because it will be part of the cost of your items that you sell in the country. That is one. The other one that will cause imported inflation is the exchange rate. So even though maybe China will have a low inflation rate, like say 1%, but because your exchange rate to the dollar is so high, if you go to import, you will still increase your profit. Other than that, you will make losses. So imported inflation is caused by both the inflation in the foreign country and also the exchange rate. So long as we want to import as a country from other countries, then we should be thinking of the imported inflation. And imported inflation, usually we don't have control over it. We don't have control over it. And so that is why economists like myself always advocate for local production. Because for local production, if you are producing the tomatoes in Ghana, you have control over it. Government can even decide that, okay, you are bringing the price control. Nobody should sell tomatoes beyond 5 cedis, But if you are importing it, you can't put in that price control. So we don't have control over the imported inflation. Therefore, if care is not taken, it will always hunt us. It will always hunt us. So these two major components of inflation, if we tackle them, I'm sure we will expect inflation to be low in the country for some time now. Now, many people want to talk about the fuel prices. Let me say that Ghana is in a deregulation regime, petroleum deregulation. So government is no longer regulating the prices of petrol, except the government's components on the price, which is coming from the taxes and the levies that government puts on it. Every price is determined on the market. It's determined 2 weeks. So the OMCs meet, and then based on the prices they gain from the international market, they set their own price. So it's not government that sets fuel prices. But clearly government has a component on it, which you call the taxes and the levies. So if you want government to reduce fuel prices, government cannot reduce the entire fuel prices. The only thing the government can do is to reduce the taxes on it or the levies on it. So I just want us to educate ourselves and know that it is not government that sets fuel prices. We are in the deregulation regime, and therefore government has no control except the taxes and levies. Government has no control over the other charges that we put on the fuel prices. So when the international price, crude oil price rise, we should expect the increase in export prices, and therefore little can government do about it. However, when the international crude oil prices rise, the consumers suffer, because you and I who go and buy the trotro or have a private car go and buy the fuel, we will suffer. But the government will gain. Government will gain through the taxes that it will collect, and also through the crude oil that we sell on the international market, because we also produce crude oil. So if crude oil now is selling at $73 per barrel, government will benefit because we also sell crude oil. So it will increase government revenue. So that is why we must always strike the balance that when international crude oil price rises, it is not always negative in our economy, because government revenue will rise. And when government revenue rises, they are likely to use it to construct our road for us, use it to build schools, use it to build hospitals for us. So it's not always bad when the crude oil prices rise. But of course, you and I, we are the consumers. We pay directly for the S1 prices. So we will talk and talk and talk and talk till tomorrow. But it's not always negative.
All right, Dr. Sarkodie, thank you for that. You have answered all my questions, and we are at the end of my session. Any last words for us before I give people the opportunity to ask questions?
Okay, so the issue about inflation is that, I think, let me say one thing about I've observed from Bank of Ghana is that in the past, they used to fight inflation with a policy rate. Of course, that is when they are setting the policy rate, the first variable they look at is inflation. And the second variable they look at is the budget deficit. But when you want to fight inflation with a policy rate, you will only be successful if inflation is demand pull. If inflation is demand pull, then you will be successful. It means that there are so many people with money chasing fewer goods, as we call it in the local parlance. So more money chasing fewer goods. So when the Bank of Ghana increases the policy rate, it will in effect reduce the money in circulation so that you can control inflation. But if inflation is cost push, if inflation is being caused by rent, fuel prices, electricity tariffs, water tariffs, then you cannot fight inflation with policy rates. And some time ago, we were doing that to ourselves as a country. The more we increase the policy rate, the more inflation was increasing, and we're not getting the results. So maybe one day you become the governor of the central bank, and then you know that you should look at the cause of the inflation that you're going to fight. If it's demand pull, then you'll be successful in fighting it with the policy rate. But if it is a cost push, then you should forget it. You should rather go and talk about what has caused it. Is it food or non-food? Is it from agric, or is it from the industry, or is it from the fuel prices, or is it from electricity or utility tariffs? Then you can resolve the issue. But an amount of inflation is good for us, because in every economy, there are people who gain and there are people who lose. Even when the exchange rate goes up, some people will gain, some people will lose. So it's important to always strike the balance. Always strike the balance. And let me end by saying that when I'm talking about striking the balance, a typical example happened recently. When fuel prices increased, and recently in the budget, government also introduced some new taxes on fuel price, and people were like, hey, we expect inflation to be over 20%. But you see, yes, fuel prices and then others increased the non-food inflation part, but the government also did well to contain the food inflation part. So in the end, the overall inflation fell. So always you must strike the balance. Even if this side of inflation is rising and we can't do anything about it, then let's go to the other side where we can do something about it and reduce it, so that overall we'll get a lower inflation rate on the average. Thank you.
Thank you too.